University in Houston.
Right.
But we had the catalog, and it was like solid gold. I mean,
sure.
In there, the Throne of the Third Heaven by James Hampton is in there, and Bill Traylor, and even George White, who lived in Dallas. And so a number of the artists were still living and working, like Mose Tolliver in Montgomery, Alabama, and James Son Thomas, who lived in Leland, Mississippi. And so we started going to visit those artists pretty much on like a monthly basis. We sort of had a swing trip. Either we would go out on I-20 or we would go down south on Highway 90 and maybe visit Royal Robertson in Baldwin, Louisiana.
We were so into it that we would get up early and drive all day to stay in a really crappy $20 hotel outside of Leland, Mississippi.
Right.
And then spend the next day with Son Thomas. Spend a few days out visiting a lot of the other artists. And then we had started meeting different collectors, and we'd sell stuff all along the way back. And then when we'd get back, we would call a few people, we'd sell stuff. And as soon as we could, and we'd do a flea market and sell antique stuff, and as soon as we could get enough money, we'd do it again. I mean, we were so charged by, my family being from East Texas, that cotton, I'd never gotten so, I'd heard the stories about cotton, but I'd never gotten so close to meeting people that was still their livelihood. And growing up in the Methodist church, I loved old hymns, and Bruce had that Pentecostal. So all of a sudden we're able to experience on our own level that Southern culture.
Right.
And through
I think experiencing also the music firsthand, going to Reverend Hunter's church, and then when he would come down to Reverend MacDade's church and preach down here, the Baptist deacons, they would do a call and response, and the deacon would say something like, bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. And everybody in the whole church house starts just like, great Jehovah. And you feel it right in your spine. It's like this incredible, you realize that they're tapping into this kind of vibratory thing, that it affects people in a big way.
And it was the same feeling that Bruce and I really got in punk rock. So it went so beyond punk rock music.
We always say that we missed grunge by leaving Dallas and moving down to Waxahachie in 1987.
Right.
We kind of essentially checked out of the punk rock scene, and then what became grunge and all that in the early 90s, and started to visit, old Baptist ministers. And
we didn't have enough money to drive
back then.
Back to
actually, we
Dallas
also, our diet changed quite. We were vegetarians, and we tried to. I had worked at a natural food store and cooked curries, and we were vegetarians for quite a few years. And then upon meeting Reverend Hunter and his wife Ruby, they would invite us for lunch, and of course the beans have pork in them, and they're having pork ribs, and and you don't turn that down. You just decide, all right, this vegetarian thing is going to go on hold.
Right.
Well, we would go to people's houses in very rural Mississippi that would invite us for barbecue, and we knew it was a big deal for them to spend the money to put this barbecue together for us. And so that was beyond being a vegetarian, and it it's just that moving to Waxahachie gave Bruce and I the things we loved. It gave us a chance to have this identity together of experience and adventure of those things.
I think a sense of place too, and we really consider Waxahachie, part of the South, or the Southern agrarian kind of thing, that, going to visit Oxford, Mississippi, with the town square and the way that it's all laid out. Waxahachie's not that different, and in fact, a lot of the children that were the early cotton growers here, came from other parts of the South.
You probably see that big from here.
Oh yeah. Well, my mom's family was from here, and generations. My mom was born outside of Bristol in a little town called Crisp.
Ernest Tubbs.
Ernest Tubbs.
Exactly. In Walking Flora. Yeah. So anyway, she was born out in Crisp in 41, and they, she grew up, between here and Palmer. When I'm going to high school in Palmer, I grew up in Palmer and wound up going to high school in Red Oak. But all of the extended family, had been sharecroppers. Like her dad's side of the family, sharecropping had, kind of moved to town in, like I want to say in the 30s, but her mom's side of the family had been doing sharecropping, before that. And I remember, as a kid, my grandmother, being in the car with my grandmother and, her like pulling over on the side of the road and having me get out and like just being nostalgic about picking cotton and like going out in the field and just, her lamenting about how sad it was that these automatic pickers leave so much cotton in the field. Like, it was such a travesty that, that somebody would leave that much cotton out
wasteful,
there. But they were still sharecropping. Like when my mom was like, 4, 5, 6 years old, they would have quote unquote school, under the cotton wagon, while, mom and dad are out picking, mm-hmm. right? And so, this area, even as recently, I believe in it's a really amazing area because, this was like king cotton for the world at one point.
Yeah, we produced 1%.
I want to say, especially 1800s, and I think as recently as like, 1911, they were like the number one cotton producer in the world and the number one brick producer in the world because they had
Palmer
these
bricks.
Palmer bricks and the Ferris bricks. They found these clay deposits mm-hmm. and were just churning out clay deposits next to the railroad. We can churn them out and just ship out hundreds of thousands of bricks every day. And so it's just like it's a really interesting place. And it feels a world away from Dallas. I never really felt like I was part of a metroplex. It's just like, it was always, I grew up in Palmer and never went to Dallas for anything. Like we would go to if we needed something, we'd go to Waxahachie, right? Go to the Piggly Wiggly or, the Miniards or whatever. And, but,
mm-hmm.
I
consider
totally,
this a southern location.
I always felt like it was. Yeah.
It seems like, they always refer to Texas as the Southwest.
Right.
And interestingly, I-35 to me is kind of that dividing line. They say Fort Worth is where the West begins, so I-35W in the case of Fort Worth. But west of there, it's more ranching, and mm-hmm. east, it's more agrarian, even going back to like the turpentine camps in deep East Texas.
Yeah,
and the
you can look at it on a geological map, and you can see the area here is part of what's called the Blackland Prairie. And even as, the soil here is totally different from where I live now, which is, 50 minutes away. The soil where I live is like red and sandy. Nothing like the hard black clay here. And this stuff is, perfect for raising cotton, just like you're going to see across, the Southwest.
There's that visible
the southern basin here.
Fault line that's just on the other side of 35.
Midlothian,
that
the escarpment.
Everything changes, and you can see it when you drive it. It goes down, and it's all different all of a sudden.
Yeah.
I think we realized
there's kind of a cliff over there where it just kind of,
I think going through the South, and you realize that the economy in Mississippi, it's cotton, and here it's cotton. And I think growing up, I read a number of those Foxfire books, and they were interested in getting people's stories,
Right.
And so we felt like that kind of was the same thing here. And so by having a business downtown, we would meet older people that would come up and just start talking to us.
So we started we still had antiques. We were doing monthly flea markets, and we had to have a steady income. And I guess about 1990, early 91, there was a man here in town, Larry Felty, and he worked at Mountain View, and he was the head of the art department there. And he asked Bruce and I, he was familiar. He's been a long-time lover of folk art, and he was familiar with what we did and the stuff we had stacked up in the barbershop, and
right.
he asked us to put together an exhibit of contemporary folk art at Mountain View. And we put it up, and it really changed how we viewed everything because it was exhibited.
Got it.
And so it was at that time we both were like, okay, we got to do this different. We can't just stack this up. We really are collecting this. We really are exhibiting it. We love these people. We got to honor this and treat it different. So in 91, we rented another space, and that was the first really kind of Webb Gallery.
Right.
And
on Franklin Street, I
yeah,
guess.
No, it wasn't.
Rogers.
It was Rogers.
Okay.
Not far from Franklin Street,
Right,
though.
right,
We didn't
Where
go too far.
Penza's Italian restaurant is now.
Yeah, it was completely suiting because it was an old furniture and mortuary.
Yeah.
So very us, very weird, and
Was it on a square, or was it?
right off the square.
Okay.
It's right there, and it was a wonderful building, and we were there from 91 until
94.
94, I guess.
No, is that the one over near like the library? Is that,
No.
or am I?
This is on Rogers Street, the street right here at the
Okay.
stop sign. So it's just
Okay.
if you're standing on the north door of the courthouse, you can see
it.
that
Got
building
it.
from there.
Okay.
It's kind of Scott Furniture was there for years. It's kind of in that.
It
block.
was a great building, and it was a great transition for us. And at that time, we were also renting the upstairs of the adjoining building to the one we're
Where
currently in.
the old Elks Lodge that was
Right.
upstairs over there.
Because the other thing we had added on slowly was an interest in fraternal artwork.
Right.
We had started collecting some things when I worked at Half Price Books, and then when we moved here, Bruce got even more interested. We bought a group of things from some friends of ours, and it brought about a man in town that came by and said, "You can't have those things," and we were oblivious that we potentially couldn't have those things, and then
Right.
it turned out he came back and he said, "No, you really can have those," and then he befriended Bruce, and that was kind of the beginning of Bruce starting to join the lodges.
Right.
And it was
Well, that was the second lodge. I joined the Masonic Lodge in 1987 from going into the Maxwell jewelry store
yes.
down here. Mr. Maxwell had a chromolithograph that hangs on the wall that's sort of the winding path of Freemasons initiation and the various levels of degrees that
Right.
you could go through, and I just became really fascinated by that, and it looked like some kind of alchemical.
So you're saying that the Masonic artwork is what really hooked you in initially, which is sort of ironic in the end, right?
The first thing I read, a book that I'd bought at Canton back in the 70s, it was Thomas de Quincey, The English Opium Eater. The last two chapters of the book, the edition that I had from the Scott Library, was a chapter on the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians. And so it just kind of piqued my interest, these Freemasons. And coming from a Assembly of God background, well, nobody is supposed to be a member of a secret society, so I didn't
really
have
wanted to be one,
any
yeah.
relatives that I could ask about it. But when I saw this chart, I was getting my grandfather's pocket watch repaired at Mr. Maxwell's jewelry shop, and I just struck up a conversation because he had this Masonic lithograph in there, and he directed me to Sam I. Smith, who was a man here at Waxahachie, was a 33rd degree Mason, and Mr. Smith kind of, was the person that I asked to become a Mason, and so in 1987, at the age of 21, I was the youngest Mason in Texas. So,
Wow. And you didn't stop there, from what I understand.
No, I joined a number of other groups, but being an antique dealer and being interested in that kind of thing, you're always out there seeing it. And at that time, it was not a collectible thing really by many people. Like nowadays, a lot of people are interested in that kind of thing. But back then, lodges were closing in small towns all across the country. And so we would put out ads in the Antique Trader, the main Antique Digest,
Right.
wanted lodge stuff. So we got calls and letters from all kinds of people.
Back at in that period, would people